All right, good evening, everyone, and thank you all for joining us. My name is Alyssa Karpenka, and I'm the event coordinator for McNally Robinson Booksellers in Saskatoon. This event is coming to you from Treaty 6 territory, the traditional lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and Métis nations. Just to note that this event is being live streamed, so please be aware of the webcam to your right. I'd also like to take a moment to encourage you to silence your phones for the duration of the event. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Saskatoon launch of Indictment, the Criminal Justice System on Trial by Benjamin Perrin and published by University of Toronto Press. Thank you to Ben for being here tonight and for working with us to create this event. I'd also like to thank Stan Tui, Father Andre, and Chantal Nwesi of Straight Up for joining us tonight. Benjamin Perrin is a law professor at the University of British Columbia and a national best-selling author. He was in-house legal counsel and lead criminal justice and public safety advisor in the Prime Minister's office and was a law clerk at the Supreme Court of Canada. I will now turn things over to Father Andre. Please give him a warm welcome.
Right away.
Feel free to move the mic as needed.
Good evening. How are you all? Okay, who do we have here? We have some straight up people and a few other people that are recognized, but anyways. My name is Andre Poiliev, and I'm related to the, hopefully not the future Prime Minister of Canada.
You're not really related.
Oh, yeah, my cousin. There's only 16 Poilievs in Canada and about the same number in France, but that's not what we're here to talk about. Talk about this book and talk about, well, the only thing I can talk about really is Straight Up. And there's so much we could say, but I'm going to simply say, that we have a lot of intelligent people running our country. But somehow these very intelligent, capable, gifted people keep on doing the same thing over and over and over and over again and expecting different results. And you know what Einstein said about that. And Straight Up, we've thought that there might be another way. Sadly, what's happening and what's happened for the last 40 years that I've been working in the system with the young offenders and the correctional and Penn and so forth is that a lot of the guys who come into the system, the reason that got them into the system in the first place, you would all know, abandonment, rejection, abuse, isolation, on and on and on. Since conception for some. And then they grew up into that system, and then when they're 12, 13 years old, they keep on rebelling and fighting and hurting, and the system picks them up. And our system figures, and has been for a long time, that by creating an environment and creating conditions that they have will help turn the lives around of these young people from 12, 13, 14 till whatever. My friends, the conditions that they impose upon these young people are almost, if not the same, and in some cases worse than the conditions that created the problem in the first place. Not everybody will agree with me, but look at the system, the court system, the police system. We put kids in jail at 12 years old in this society. Figure it out. I go to the Kilburn Hall and it's 12 years old. And we're imposing the same system that brought them there in the first place, saying that'll change you. That makes sense? And yet we pay big bucks for people to make those kinds of decisions. And so in Straight Up, somehow, not by intent, well, yeah, maybe by intent, it was, there's got to be another way. And I'll let Chantal and Stan explain the other way, but the line that tells us what the other way is transformation. You see, in jail, they get all the services you need. So straight up doesn't have to give them the services that they've already had in jail, like clothing and shelter and food, and those are all services. But what the jails don't offer and create an environment is transformation. That's a complete change. Can you think that's happening in our jails? A complete change of who these young people are, transforming of relationships with themselves first, with others around them, with Mother Earth, and their higher power, whatever that happens to be for them. We have we have Catholics and atheists and born agains, and the other day I said dead again. So they all belong. That's not the issue. But transformation of relationships through spiritual values. And I'll let Chantal explain what that's all about. Keep that in mind. That's who Straight Up is, a transformation of relationships through spiritual values. Thank you.
So good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm just building on what Father Andre mentioned about a different way, another way, and kind of get you excited to purchase this book. I'm going to read a little thing here. It says here, Indictment puts the Canadian criminal justice system on trial and proposes a bold new vision of transformative justice. And so one of the key strengths, I believe, in Straight Up, that's a different way, is listening to people's stories. You know, I had an opportunity to kind of meet Benjamin earlier today, and we talked about the importance of stories. And you use this analogy that, you know, the criminal justice looks at the system through a straw, so you only see bits and pieces of it. Whereas in Straight Up, the strength of Straight Up is we talk with individuals, we get to know them. We actually ask them to write an autobiography of themselves. As they write an autobiography of themselves, we're seeing their life, their whole life from their perspective. And in this book, it says one of the ways that you transform the justice system is that you asked people who are involved in the justice system to kind of help create the solutions. And that's been a strength of Straight Up, is we ask Straight Up members to be involved in creating what it means to become transformed, as Father Andre mentioned. And so for that, I'll just say that piece, the importance of relationships and the importance of listening to people's stories. So thank you.
I'm having my reach the microphone. Feel free to pull it down. Hi. That work? Yeah. I was forced to come here. Good evening, everybody. My name is Chantal. I've been a Straight Up member for 10 years. I've been employed with the organization since September 20, a few months after I got out on another parole. I became a Straight Up member 10 years ago when I was out in a halfway house in Saskatoon serving a federal sentence. And somebody from the trenches and the lifestyle said, I have two men that I want you to meet. And I said, I want nothing to do with any men. I'm trying to do good. But it was soon after that I was in a parking lot of Tim Hortons parking lot with Stan and Andre, and they were going over the goals and conditions of Straight Up and what it means to become a member and how to become a member. And they told me I had to write an autobiography. I said, what's that? And they told me you have to write from as far back as you can remember the story of your life up until today. And I was like, I can't do it. Because it's easier for me to fix you and you and you and you, but it's really hard for me to look at me because I don't want to look at that. I don't want to heal those pains. I want to reflect it. I want to put it on other people, but I don't want to look at myself. So the first thing that we have to do when we become Straight Up members is we have to put that pen to the paper and we have to write our story.
Not for other people to read, not for other people to gossip about, for us to understand what we've been through in our life, why we made the choices that we made, why do we have the behaviors that we have, and how come I ended up in these spaces and these places over and over and over again. So I did that, and then we handed in. And we become members, we commit to 5 conditions and 3 goals. And this is where transformation happens. So the first condition of straight up is to drop your colors. Every single gang member is repping a color, whether it's red, white, blue, purple, green. I don't know all the colors out there anymore. That's a good thing. That means I've distanced myself from the life, but we have to drop that. How do you drop that when that's all you know? For a lot of our members, that's how we grew up. That's what we were surrounded in. I wasn't. My story starts back to conception. I'm a product of rape. I have absolutely no idea who I am as a human being. So everything these days is about identity, and I just know I am a human and I have a purpose and I have a will to live. So I had to drop my colors. So myself with 4 other people, I left the gang by dropping my colors by robbing a bank in Regina. That's what I did. I didn't stay away though. My addiction would bring me back to the gang lifestyle. Second condition of straight up is to deal with your addiction. Every single person living the street criminal lifestyle, in prison, incarcerated, in a gang, is addicted to something. Sex, power, money, control, alcohol, drugs, violence, food, internet, porn, you name it, we're substituting something for something else, and we have to deal with it. And that means taking a hard look at myself and addressing those pains in that autobiography, and how do I start healing that trauma? The third condition of straight up is to become an honest person. Honest? What's that? I'm lying to everybody and anybody I possibly can to get what I want, how I want, when I want, from who I want. I'm lying to my family. I'm lying to my children. I'm lying to my parole officer. I'm lying to my coworkers. I'm lying to people on the streets. I'm lying to every single person that I meet. And I have to undo that. And I have to transform that dishonest approach into an honest approach. So we become honest people. And it's a process and it takes time. And when we do our presentations, they say, can you feel? Can you see an honest person? And the answer is no. But I always say the answer is yes. Because if I'm dishonest, I feel it in the pit of my stomach. Fourth condition of straight up is to become a humble person. And it was a humbling lesson to learn what humility was, because I thought it was humor, because I like to laugh, and it has nothing to do with humor. You're out there gangbanging, you're doing home invasions, you're committing crimes, you're stealing, you're selling drugs, you're destroying communities, you're doing what you want to who you want, when you want, how you want. All self-serving behaviors. Everything's about me. Everything I did was for me. So in straight up, we learn that we have to take a step back. We have to join the human race and come to an understanding that we're not God. I'm no better than you, and none of you are any better than me. We're all equal. That's the fourth condition. And the fifth condition of straight up is to give 4 years of your life. I've been around for 10. I came and go. I really like taking federally funded vacations. I thought they were cool at one point in my life. We used to call it Club Fed. Like Andre said, because you had 3 meals a day, you had clothes, you had everything you absolutely needed, but you didn't have relationships. So we give 4 years. Everything we do is based on the medicine wheel, the 4 directions, the 4 colors, the 4 elements. For us, it means more than that. It means that healing is a process and it takes time. So we give 4 years of our lives, because I can't say, hey, one day, today, I want to change my life. I want to be a better person and wake up tomorrow and it's done. It's not like that. Healing's not linear. It's a process and it takes time. And that addiction's always sitting on our shoulder. So those are the conditions of straight up. And we have 3 goals we commit our lives to. First goal is to become a loving parent. What does that mean? I had no idea. I have 3 children and I have 9 grandchildren. My oldest is going to be 30 on the weekend, and my youngest grandchild, there's 3. So my 2 boys were taken away from me, and my daughter was my co-accused. She was my no contact. She was the person I committed crime with. She was the person I used with. She was, the list goes on and on and on and on. How do I transform all of that negative into a positive? Right? So for me, I woke up one morning and I looked over and my daughter was my cellmate, and that was my light bulb moment. What am I doing? At what point does this stop? At what point do I have to make different decisions in my life? And at what point am I going to role model a different way to my children? So that's the first goal of Straight Up, is to be a loving parent. The second goal of Straight Up is to be a faithful, I always add loving partner in there. My first addiction was toxic relationships. If I wasn't getting hit, if I didn't have black eyes, if he wasn't pushing me down the stairs, the list goes on and on and on and on. He didn't love me. And that was my twisted, distorted thinking of what love was, right? So we don't encourage our members to get into relationships. The best relationship that we can get into is one with ourselves, with others, with Mother Earth, and then, like Andre said, is our higher power, whatever we believe in. And then the third goal of transformation for a Straight Up member is to become a responsible citizen. And I like to speed, but that's not being responsible, but I do it anyway. But for me, responsible citizen isn't about following the law. It isn't about any of that. It's about how I treat people. It's about spiritual values, transforming them from negative ones to positive ones. How do you treat people? With respect, with compassion, caring, love, forgiveness. We have 54 spiritual values at Straight Up. And a huge part of those values is who we are and how we transform our lives. So for me, a responsible citizen is being an honest person, speaking my truth, even though it offends people often, but it's my story, right? And for myself, my last federal sentence, I started to find healing in a federal penitentiary in CSC, and it was because of the relationships that I built with people who chose to come in and spend their time with the inmates, with the elders that would come in, with programs that would come in, with people from church that would come in. But it was those people that were willing to give their time. And that's how I started my transformation, along with the help of Stan and Andre from the outside, connecting with CSC to make this support network for me. So autobiography, 5 conditions, 3 goals, and our main focus is community education and sharing stories. So thank you.
My name is Weissy, and I'm one of the new members of Straight Up, and I've been involved with Straight Up since the beginning of the year, and I joined Straight Up because I got sick of the gang life and selling drugs and doing drugs, drinking all the time and hurting people, and I just got sick of that, and I wanted to do something better with my life, and Straight Up has been there to support me and push me in a more positive direction. I'm doing good for myself, yeah. I was just very thankful for Straight Up for being there for me, and I thank you guys all for being here tonight, and you guys all have a good night.
Oh, thank you so much, Wacy, Chantel, Stan, Father Andre. I don't know if this is how most book talks go. Is it? Anyone else been to a book talk where the author says, take the stage to someone else? I'll tell you why. There's some very wise words that I was told as I first started doing the research for this book. Some of you may have in fact heard some of these words. This is from the late Harold Johnson, from this beautiful province of Saskatchewan, a member of the Montreal Lake Cree Nation, Harvard-educated lawyer, and and the author of a book called Peace and Good Order, the Case for Indigenous Justice in Canada. So I'm going to recommend you get that book too, okay? I'm going to go home with a few books tonight, hopefully. I interviewed Harold for this book. Here's what he says. Stop holding conferences. Stop with the symposiums. Give it up. He's talking to law professors, in case you're wondering. You are wasting air. You haven't implemented the modest tinkering that you endlessly discuss. Your ideas are too little and too late. Instead of coming together for discussions amongst yourselves, wasting time, energy, and money, you should instead have those same conversations with Indigenous peoples. If you insist on holding a symposium, make sure you hear from someone who has spent time in your jails. If your conference is in a city, bring in Indigenous people from the street, give them something to eat, let them warm up, and then listen to what they have to say. You are never going to find solutions if you continue to have conversations about us without us. It's so true. I've been involved in some way or another in the criminal justice system for the last 20 years, whether that was as a law student, doing legal aid type cases in downtown Toronto, whether it was as a law professor, whether it was in the Prime Minister's office advising on policies. I've been to the five-star hotels, judges conferences. I've sat fireside with the Supreme Court. I've been in the the federal cabinet table. And never once did I hear folks share like Chantal Wasey, not once. Doesn't happen. So how did I come to write this book? Well, it started actually with a letter from an Indigenous man who was being incarcerated in British Columbia. He sent me a 7-8 page handwritten letter. And you can tell he was desperate because he's contacting a law professor who's not practicing law, right? People are looking for help. Most people can't afford a lawyer. And I thought he was just going to ask for some help, and I was going to refer him to a legal aid organization. He didn't ask for anything. He just wanted to share his story. And it made it a lot harder, right? It would have been real easy to just be like, oh, ship you off to someone else. The fact he didn't ask for anything, I had to actually read what he wrote. Again, here's a line from the letter. I did not have to go back in writing this book to reread that letter because these words were like burned into my memory. He wrote, if you want to turn a man into an animal, put him in a cage without the resources to build himself back up. And around the same time, Jody Wilson-Raybould, who, as many of you know, was Canada's first Indigenous Minister of Justice and Attorney General, at the same time, they were doing a big public consultation. They asked this big question. So it's like a once-in-a-generation question. She asked, if you could design a new criminal justice system from scratch, what would it look like? So that was the impetus for this project. We went right across the country interviewing people who had had their lives, in some cases, devastatingly impacted by the justice system, as victims and survivors of crime, as people who were incarcerated, and as we often found, people who were both. They were both at one point and many times themselves victims, and other times had harmed others. The first person that we interviewed, just to give you a sense of the kind of things that we were hearing, that responded to our research poster, and that poster asked one very simple question, big bold text. It said, what was your experience like with the criminal justice system? My email, my phones, social media started getting flooded. People wanted to tell their stories. Like Stan was mentioning a minute ago, most people have never had the chance to tell their whole story, ever. Not to, if they had a lawyer, their lawyer only care about the charges, really. Get a sentencing, I'll get a bit about your background, maybe. So they wanted the opportunity to share. And the second thing that almost everyone said was, if I can make one life better because of someone hearing my story, then it'd be worth it. They're motivated by a sense of trying to make things better for at least someone else. So everyone in the book has got a fictional name. They're anonymized for their privacy, but they're all real people, and this is their real stories. Courtney, as we call her in the book, was the first person who responded. And like Father Andre said, we start locking people up at age 12. I have a 12, if you ever stop to think of, I have a 12-year-old. I cannot imagine what her life would be like I'm too far removed from 12, so I'm thinking of my kids. I cannot imagine the horror there. From ages 12 to age 39, which is when I interviewed Courtney, so 12 to 39, she was in and out of juvenile, provincial, and federal systems for 25 years of her life, between 12 and 39. And when I asked her about her experience, she started off by talking about how it was pretty good. And I thought, this research project's off to an interesting start. I'd been hearing about all these horrible things that were supposedly happening in the justice system, and this is a twist. But okay, let's hear more. So I asked her the question: what was pretty good about it? She said they fed us really well, 3 meals a day, every day, and sometimes we even got a snack. That was what stood out as a positive. Then she went to talk about how she was housed in a co-ed institution with teenagers who were at that point 12 to 17. She's a 12-year-old. She was the only female in the institution. And when she would misbehave, she would be put in isolation in the rubber room. When I asked her, what did misbehaving look like? Well, what did you do? I expected there to be some extreme acts of violence she'd done or some horrific things. She says, well, like when I swear at the guards, they would lock me up. It went on from there, and she talked about some horrific things. She talked about how when she attempted to commit suicide, rather than treating her with care and compassion, after they had quite literally just stitched her up, they put her back in a segregation cell for 3 months without another living soul. She talked about how when she was maced by prison guards, they held it in her eyes and her ears for several minutes. She was deaf for over a month. It took her hours to try to get that out. And from the halfway house that she was now living in, she described how she didn't really know how to interact with people. She says, I've got I can leave now. I have to check in every 2 hours, but I don't really want to leave because I'm worried I'm not in a good neighborhood. I don't want to go back to the partying and the drugging and the drinking. And I don't really know how to live in this world. I had nightmares about what she described, and I was just hearing the stories. The fact is that our prisons and jails are not just meant to keep people locked inside, they keep us out as well. I can't just walk in the door as a researcher and go start talking to people or chatting with people or inspecting the conditions of incarceration. Canada is one of a very few number of countries, Western developed countries, that has refused to sign international treaties giving national and international monitors access to our places of incarceration. Okay. Now, we also interviewed, as I said, survivors and victims of crime. Incredibly, they described the most horrific treatment by the system that was supposed to be there to help them. We talked to survivors of intimate partner violence who were told by victim services workers things like, this is a direct quote from a person in the book I call Sky. Sky was told by a victim services worker, why are you so stupid? Why don't you just leave him? These are not one-off deals. Oh, there's a few bad apples here. I kept hearing story after story like this. A court-appointed counselor, a man, later on when there was some couples counseling going on because they were trying to work things out a little bit, gave some advice to Sky and said, try not to make him so angry. Try not to make him so angry. This is the advice. Sky described for me that they had experienced 5 years of daily physical and sexual violence. And they said that it was worse for them how they were treated by the system than the criminal victimization that they had endured. And that's a really hard thing for me to understand. I hadn't lived that. And I started to try to unpack and understand it. They had become to know and expect that kind of horrific behavior. But when they finally were able to reach out for that support in that moment, there's immense sense of betrayal by people who are supposed to protect you. These are the people who are supposed to be there. And they treated them like that. So this book, as the subtitle says, puts the criminal justice system on trial. The witnesses in the case against the system, this fictional case as it were in the book, are the people who have lived through it and survived to tell the story. And the corrections officers who work in the system, the police officers, the elders who are going inside these places of incarceration, the substance use, mental health, and addictions staff, the parents of children who have either died while incarcerated from suicide or overdose, deaths from contaminated drugs. and the family members left behind, people who've been racially profiled, whose children have been killed in police encounters. And we also do go and look at what the statistics and the studies say and the academic research. So I wanted to talk for a few minutes about what would a new approach look like. It's easy to criticize the system, and these problems that we see are in fact getting worse. But we're going to talk in a moment about what would a new approach look like. What would a transformative approach to criminal justice look like? Before I do that, though, right now we're really being offered one of two things in Canada. One is that we're going to deal with, rising crime rates, rising unregulated drug deaths, rising homelessness with more criminal justice, tough on crime measures, more police, more prisons, harsher penalties, build some more remand centers, that kind of approach. Or we're going to tinker with the system a bit. We're going to maybe appoint a few more Indigenous judges, or we're going to have some more so little one harm reduction, supervised consumption site here. We're just going to have one. Nothing that's going to really change things. Those are really the only two options on offer, and neither one of them is going to change things in any major way. The outcomes that we get from locking people up beyond the immense physical, emotional, and spiritual harm to individuals, we see on a big scale. What does it do? Well, we know from over 60 years of criminological studies, locking someone up in prison increases the chances of them reoffending. It increases the chances of them reoffending. Secondly, it increases unemployment. The studies that Corrections Canada has done, they track people who are released from federal custody 14 years out. The median offender, so that's I had to go back and look up what median was, if anyone remembers like grade 3 math, okay? So if there's 100 people and you count in the person who's rated number 50 is the median person, okay? The median offender 14 years out was earning $0 still 14 years after. They were unemployed at the time of arrest. We have increased suicides and increased unregulated drug deaths. It is shocking. Someone who has an opioid use disorder who is sent into custody, even for a short period on remand, they're 50 times more likely to die. 50 times more likely to die from unregulated drugs. Their tolerance rapidly goes down, even though drugs are accessible to a large degree still in all places of confinement. And when they do use, folks described to me, one man particularly said, look, I knew there was a risk when I got out that when I used again, it was going to be, dangerous. So he said, I started out with what was a crumb. And he thought, oh, this isn't even I'm not even gonna feel this. And he was knocked unconscious, like immediately. Fortunately, someone was there to save his life. And of course, the other big one in this research that we know, it absolutely keeps getting worse and worse, is the disproportionate impact on Indigenous people, Black people, people of color, people with mental health and substance use disorders. So I pulled a few stats from the book just to make it, some of you know these, some of you may not, and we need to remember these are people. We're up to now 32%, a third of all federally incarcerated people in Canada are Indigenous. We said 5% nationally, folks who are Indigenous. When we look further and look at the female incarcerated federal population, it's half of all federal female incarcerated people are Indigenous. When we look here at Saskatchewan, and if we want to see if things are going to get better or worse, we need to look at who's entering the system, like who's coming in. In terms of new admissions to custody in Saskatchewan, 75%, 3/4 of everyone entering into your prisons and jails is Indigenous. 75%. Kind of want to know, is it going to get better or worse? And I can confidently tell you it is absolutely going to get worse. How can I say that? Unless something major changes, because you look at that pipeline, that child welfare to youth, juvenile detention, to provincial, to federal. So let's look down. We can literally see the future. You can see the future 10 years out, 6 to 10 years out. These are the numbers in Saskatchewan, the highest in the entire country. We were in Manitoba giving them a hard time yesterday. You're worse on this one, okay? You're worse on this one. The new admissions of youth into custody in this province, 88%, almost 9 out of 10 people Indigenous. I don't know if anyone could think it will get worse. I've got one more and it's even worse. In 2019 and 2020, in both Saskatchewan and Manitoba, every single female youth admitted was Indigenous, every single one. I had to go back and check that 3 or 4 times. So it is no exaggeration that Indigenous leaders and advocacy groups are describing this as not only the new residential schools, but a form of genocide against Indigenous people. Now, I mentioned about Harold Johnson earlier. He describes a 3-step process that this has happened by. First, the violence that colonialism has caused to Indigenous people, including residential schools, the scoops, systemic racism that Indigenous people experience on a daily basis, creates the harm. It creates that pain, not just intergenerationally, but also personally and directly in many folks' lives. Then, settler colonialism gave us the antidote: alcohol and drugs, things that were completely foreign to Indigenous peoples, to numb and medicate that pain. And then it went and criminalized people for using those in the Indian Act and under our current drug laws. So the justice system is about holding people accountable and about justice. And when we begin to see where blame lies, we need to be turning the mirror around on our society for these causes. Now, I want to be really clear, and I am in the book. No one is saying that the traumas that someone experienced will justify or excuse them harming someone. Absolutely not. But if we're serious about better responding to harm in our society, we've got to understand how trauma gets transmitted and to break those cycles. So let's talk about what would a new system look like for just a few minutes. So rather than focus on a punitive model, punishing people, trying to help them learn their lesson through locking them up through harsh conditions, in this book, I argue for what I call a new transformative justice vision. The idea being we should focus on transforming the trauma that people experienced. The trauma starts with people even before they're born. We know from the research that someone who experiences 5 out of 10 adverse childhood experiences, these are things like physical, sexual, emotional abuse or neglect. The incarceration of a parent is a traumatic event for a child that our system is perpetrating as well. They have 5 out of 10 of those. They're 50% more likely to harm someone later in life. It's not for sure, but it's a 50% more likely to hurt people. But what people don't often talk about is the other side, that someone who's abused as a child is also more likely to be victimized further later in life. Chantal, you shared a bit about that, right? The expectations that came and folks are 8 times more likely to be sexually victimized as adults if they were harmed as children. And so the first thing we need to do to deal with harm in our society is to start at the earliest possible stages. So in the book, we don't just talk about neat ideas. Wouldn't it be neat if we tried this approach or theory? Every single chapter, all 7 chapters on what would a new approach look like, have real working programs and policies somewhere in the world, many of which are in Canada, that have been working for decades, getting better results and at a fraction of the price. They all share something in common though. They're chronically underfunded. When the independent reviews are done, it's, yeah, you're reducing recidivism, less reoffending. Great, remember the system we have now is increasing it, okay? Victims are more satisfied, they're happier. And you're actually, in some cases, saving massive amounts of taxpayer dollars from breaking those cycles, preventing more child welfare risk interactions, criminal justice, healthcare. So Straight Up is exactly a program, and just so you know, I'm not just saying this because Stan and Father Andre are here today. Literally, it is one of the 7 chapters in the book is on this idea of transforming trauma and having approaches like Straight Up does that gets to the root causes. Many people talk about the root causes of criminality or substance use and mental health or poverty or homelessness, and those are part of what we call social determinants of crime and justice. But what quite frankly blew my mind, Andre, as I was speaking with you and the other members of Straight Up, is you go to the root of the root, the cause of causes, which is the harm and the trauma in people's lives, and begin to heal that first. Yeah, that is it. And that, I can tell you, that's been my own experience in my own life with getting healing and, this idea of I'll just try harder not to use the drugs, or I promise I'll be a better partner. That doesn't, those promises don't last long, as hard as you hope they will. and the root being one of humility and turning from these old ways towards a new path, a healthier path in community. That, I mean, I talk about straight up in the book, and it's a model. It's a model for folks to be inspired by. And one of the things I asked Father Andre said, can we just, you can't cookie cutter this. I know you can't just replicate it. You can't give me a guide and, you know, take it to BC and just say, here, do this. It's not that. Why? Because it's built in these relationships. So I put up the members of Straight Up who've really encouraged me to say, look, what's really exciting is no matter who's in Ottawa or who's in your provincial capital today, like, there are people in your community who decided we're led to this place if there's a better way. So this new transformative justice vision, it is about changing laws and policies, but it's primarily about changing our hearts. So if folks who go through the program Straight Up can do that, I think all of us should too. I think this is a recipe for societal change too. What if we were more humble in approaching these issues? What if we looked at ourselves? What if we started to not see ourselves as any better or worse than people who are on the evening news? So transforming trauma, it starts at childhood. And there's really effective programs in the book I talk about, like the Nurse Family Partnership that supports young families. When they do that, we see dramatically lower levels of childhood maltreatment and dramatically lower criminal convictions for those youth who are helped as infants when they are teenagers. The other a few examples I want to talk about is you know, we need to stop treating things like homelessness, mental health issues, and drug deaths as criminal law issues. And we absolutely are. We're using police to decamp homeless people in Canada. We are, police have gone undercover in Saskatchewan, taking donations, posing as homeless people. This is on CTV. I'm not making this stuff up. So if any of you have not heard the story, essentially, someone was, you know, driving down the street, saw what they thought was a homeless person, gave them some change, turned the corner, and the lights come on. And they then charged. They said, hey, you know, what are you taking me for? They said, well, you just, you know, gave money to a homeless person on the side of the road there. They said, no. They said to the police officer, what police officer? He said, that's an undercover police officer. And so it was like $150 or $200 ticket. I'm not making this up. Go on CTV. And when the police were questioned about it, they, rather than in shame, sort of say, we'll change it, do not do. They said, no, we routinely do this. We routinely do this. The city of Barrie, just a little bit outside of Toronto, recently tried to pass a bylaw, which would have made it a bylaw offense to give food and water or a tarp or tent to someone, anyone on public property, making it illegal. This is not the kind of society that I want to live in. We have come so far. So things like homelessness and housing, and you know, what's the answer to that? It's the answer to homelessness is housing. The research is really clear on that. We've got studies that show that supportive housing, which is where it's safer and you've got programs around it, is way less expensive than these temporary shelter spaces where people live on mats. It's like half the price or even less. We don't wait for people to stop using drugs to put a roof over their head. Housing first are policies that are designed to do that. 24/7. Non-police crisis response teams is another idea in the book. So rather than have the police be the first point of contact responding to someone who's in mental health distress or who's sleeping in a business's doorway when they want to open or is shouting profanities or yelling at the sky, we don't send the police there. Right now, if you call 911, you get police, fire, ambulance. That's it. City of Toronto and some other cities now have a fourth option. It's a crisis worker, a peer, someone who's trained and educated and able to help. And in Oregon, they have a program that does this. And guess what? They take 15 to 20% of all 911 and non-police emergency calls. That program costs $2 million a year for the city of Eugene. And they've found that it saves almost $10 million in what would otherwise be ambulance, fire trucks, and police showing up. The other reason we need to do this is that 68%, so over 2/3 of people who die in encounters with police were having mental health or substance use issues. Restorative justice is also a critical part of a new approach to transforming trauma, because it brings those who were harmed to the same table as those who harmed them. If they're both interested in participating, and the reoffending rates are lower, the satisfaction rates are higher for victims. There's a conference that we're going to tomorrow in Moose Jaw on restorative justice and reconciliation in this province, and it should be the main way that we deal with conflict. The final two that I want to briefly mention and just refer to is, we talked before about prisons. You know, prisons and jails are places where most people leave worse, not better. Right? I had folks say, you know, I literally spent the night staying awake, you know, sharpening a shank, wondering who's going to jump me. You know, these are not places to get better. I had one fellow describe it. He said prison is like 90 to 95% just bored out of your mind, and 5% sheer terror. Okay? And so some of the most devastating stories that I heard, as I thought on that, like, no wonder, you know, folks are coming out. We see those higher reoffending rates. If you're not part of a gang, you might as well join one. You know, your substance use issues, talk about triggers and trauma, right? You had a job, you've lost it. You had family, those relationships are getting disrupted. You had housing, that's probably going to be gone when you get out. So we had people who spoke to us who said, yeah, at the end of my sentence, I released in prison shoes in the community with no ID. It's 5 o'clock on a Friday, and I'm a city, I don't know a single soul. And we wonder why someone would break into a van and sleep in the back. Okay. So we're setting people up for failure, but we're also setting us up for failure as a society. So I looked at countries like Norway. They don't have it perfect, but they have a much different model. They had a similar system to Canada. And after a few prison riots and some guards were killed, they had a real national reckoning. They decided to do things differently. They said, we're going to reorient our whole system, because some people do need to be separated from society because they're a significant risk, right? So they abolished essentially traditional prisons and jails in favor of this new approach, which is to say, what kind of a neighbor do you want to have? Basically, everyone's getting out at some point. So what kind of a neighbor do you want? So what do they say? Well, we want someone who's had their counseling and substance use support, someone who has got vocational training in a job, someone who's in an institution that looks a lot like a college campus. It's not a threatening, imposing environment. They've got pottery classes and beach volleyball. Rather than have corrections guards with a high school diploma and lots of use of force training, they have post-secondary education, and they're not called guards, they're called contact officers. They have 2 or 3 inmates. Their goal is that you never come back. They're there to mentor you and support you. So what happened? You know, when I described this to a reporter, they said, I can see the attack ads now. If someone does this, maybe soft on crime, hug a thug. We know now rhyming is how we make policy in Canada, apparently. So what would you say about that? And I said, well, you know what you do is you own it. You say, yeah, we are going to heal people, and they're going to come out better, and you are going to be safer. Do you want someone who is being beaten up, joining street gangs, and going through withdrawal in prison, and then coming out into your community at 5 on a Friday with no resources and no hope? Or do you want someone who's had the pottery class and had some counseling? I say pottery class and counseling. Yeah, own it, right? And I said, I dare you, build one and see what happens. What happened in Norway? They went from very similar reoffending rates to what we have in Canada, 60 to 70% reoffending. And that's within a short period of time. It's not like lifetime reoffending. It's been like 2 to 5 years. They went from 60 to 70% of people getting out and reoffending down to just 20%. Okay. A completely different system. So we need to do that. We should have a moratorium on building new places of incarceration because they don't work and are incredibly harmful. It is not only a tremendous waste of taxpayer dollars to build further remand space in provinces like Saskatchewan, but it is proof of this indictment. The system is not working. The system itself isn't broken. It is perfectly designed to get the results that it's getting. The reason you have to build more places to lock people up is because the places that you're locking them up in is making it worse and worse and worse, not just for them, but for future generations of their children and their children's children. And the last piece is on Indigenous justice. There's a tremendous focus in the book on that topic, and we spoke to Indigenous folks at every single stage and walk of life. And what we found is that where Indigenous people lead, we get better results. With Indigenous-led peacekeeping and policing, communities that have that had 25% lower violent crime rates. That is a massive reduction in crime. When we have Indigenous-led, when we have Indigenous healing lodges, they have better outcomes as well. But the thing that we found, once again, despite the outcomes being better, chronically underfunded and discriminatorily underfunded. I didn't know this. So some of you may know this part really well, but others it's news to you. So The Federal Corrections Service of Canada operates some healing lodges on its own, and others are run by Indigenous nations and organizations. The ones that are run by Indigenous nations and organizations are funded at a fraction of the per capita cost of what the ones run by the feds are. There's no other thing to say. And then they go, oh, and it's no wonder why we don't have as many Indigenous-led programs. Well, Harold Johnson quite simply says, we don't need to wait. This is not about negotiation. It's part of our inherent right to self-government. And so we saw that in a number of different parts of the country where Indigenous nations are starting to lead. In Quebec, they started their own police force, their own peacekeepers in 1979. They didn't ask for permission, they just went and did it. It wasn't until 1995 that the Ganawagi peacekeepers received federal provincial funding. Okay? And they, again, way better results at a fraction of the price. So I'll just conclude by saying, we don't have to keep doing things the same way we've been doing them. Okay? There are new and better ways to deal with harm in our society. And they're not just a dream in the sky, they're happening right now. They're happening here in your city with organizations like Straight Up. So I hope you'll support them. We're leaving in 2 days to go back to Vancouver. You're all still here. And so, you know, change happens locally and it happens with people who inspire others to do that. And I just thank you, Father Andre, Stan, Chantel, and everyone else I spoke to at Straight Up, because you guys inspired me and your stories are powerful and keep telling them. Thanks very much.
I'd like to thank Ben, Father Andre, Stan, Chantal, and Wacy for sharing with us tonight. We have copies of Indictment on the desk to your right, and if you'd like your copy signed or if you'd like to say hello, Ben will be happy to meet you at the signing table here. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, that's all it's in.